We begin today's program with a keynote conversation with Maya Chorengel and Melanie Schnoll. Maya Chorengel needs no introduction. She is a pioneer in the field of social impact. As a young girl, she remained awake thinking of the plight of the less fortunate, who had nothing to do with the circumstances in which they were born. Maya Chorengel is currently the co-managing partner at the Rice Fund, where she leads impact and financial services. She has been with TPG since 2017 and is based in San Francisco. Maya has over 2 decades of private equity, venture capital, and impact investing experience globally. Melanie Begun-Schnoll is the managing director and head of philanthropy management at Morgan Stanley. Melanie launched and oversees the Morgan Stanley Global Impact Funding Trust, exceeding over $1 billion. Another impressive endeavor that Melanie is involved in is the Social Impact Exchange. Melanie leads the social impact conferences every year, bringing together the best and brightest minds in the country to share, discuss, and debate the current issues and solutions. Melanie chaired the social impact track with me in 2017 TiEcon. With that, I ask you all to join me in welcoming Melanie Schnoll and Maya Chorengel on the stage.
Maya, it's so good to spend time with you today. And for our audience, Maya spent her career building solutions to bring capital to those around the world who need it most, but have the least ability to access it. She spent time in investment banking, private equity, venture capital, and has spent the last 15 years in impact investing. And today, as Anu suggested, Maya is co-managing partner of the Rise Fund, TPG's global impact fund stewarding $6 billion in commercial capital towards UN Sustainable Development Goal aligned investments. Maya, I love starting with an origin story. What brought you to this work? What was that aha moment for you?
Great, thank you, Melanie. It's a good question, and I just wanted to say thank you to you for doing this with me today, and also thank you to everybody on the organizing committee, the audience for being here. It's my good fortune that I sit here today as an impact investor, and I really saw my coming in to do this work as a culmination of my life experience. But to start way back at the beginning, I grew up in Asia. And I grew up in a family that had air conditioning and a roof over our heads and a beautiful garden to live in, and many people in the Philippines. So my mother is Filipino, who lived on the other side of the wall from my grandparents that I spent a lot of time, lived in very, very challenging circumstances. They did not have roofs over their heads. They lived in shacks. And I would go to sleep every night thinking about how lucky I was to have the benefit of a safe home, food on the table, every meal, a good education. And I knew that there was something that I needed to do about this at some point in my life. And at the time that I grew up, I went to college, I did development economics, I went to investment banking. This was in the early 90s. And then I went into private equity and venture capital because at that time, if you wanted to do good for the world, you went to the world of philanthropy or to the World Bank. There wasn't really a business solution that was widely thought about, and I was more a business person. But when I learned about the concept of taking a commercial approach to solving a great problem, I was really captivated by this, and this was in the early 2000s. And that really began my career in impact investing. And to be able to sit here today and combine the skills I learned as an investor and as a finance person in private equity and investment banking, but to link back to the small child who felt very lucky every night about where I lived and where I stood, and to do this work is really, I think, the expression of why I am here today.
It is such a beautiful story, and I know that there's so many people in the audience who feel lucky to do the work that they do, but you could hear the passion in your own voice. I think many of us have had our own aha moments that motivate us to support and drive innovation in the social sector. I know that's certainly a part of my career. But why has it been so hard for corporations, entrepreneurs, philanthropy, governments, and other stakeholders to really make change? And what have been the biggest barriers along this spectrum?
I think that one of the barriers that we see being broken down today is the division between all of those different worlds. So when I went to Harvard Business School, the prevailing mantra was shareholder capitalism, or what I'd call the responsibility of businesses and business leaders to generate the highest profit for your shareholders. And that was sort of the purpose of business. And it was taken from Milton Friedman. But if you fast forward to today, what we live in is a world that is increasingly becoming one of stakeholder capitalism, where everyone from business leaders like Larry Fink and Jamie Dimon and Paul Pullman, of former CEO of Unilever, are talking about the responsibility of business, not just to generate profit for their shareholders, but also to think about employees and customers and responsibility to planet, and to think about working with government, to think about working with philanthropies to solve these big problems and to bring, all of the different skill sets to the table. So I think historically, we lived in a more siloed world where government would do its own thing, business would do its own thing, which would generally generate profit and not think about, doing good. Philanthropies would do their own thing. And what we're seeing now is a weaving together of strategies and efforts to try and work together to make people and planet safer and to create the world that we can be proud to give on to the next generation. But historically, that wasn't at all the focus, particularly of business.
Yeah, it's really interesting to see how things have certainly changed over time, and that movement is leading us to the world that we all want to live in together. When you look at using capital to truly address the challenges in our world today, there are clearly many ways to have an impact, Maya. You have for-profit companies, B corporations that are more market-driven, all the way to social enterprises, and then even pure philanthropy, the space that I spend most of my time in. How do you think about what sort of capital is appropriate to address a given social challenge?
Right. It's a great question, Melanie. So I live in the world of fully commercially footed capital that requires a market return. Within the RISE Fund, we manage capital on behalf of pension funds, sovereign wealth funds that have a fiduciary responsibility to their constituents to deliver a market return. And so the space that I live in and that I work in is where commercial capital is an appropriate tool to think about a social or environmental problem. It's not a silver bullet, because when you look at the problems that exist in the world, there's a spectrum of different kinds of problems, whether it's issues around climate and clean planet and sustainable agriculture. If you look at social problems like quality educational access for all, healthcare for all, gender equality, poverty alleviation. There are myriad problems, and not everything should be addressed by commercial capital. Some problems have to be addressed by philanthropic capital that doesn't require a return. I'll give you one example. Generally, services for the homeless, let's say, or interventions for which a return on investment is absolutely inappropriate. Those should be handled by philanthropies, or in some cases, governments need to step in and provide a solution to a big problem where seeking a commercial return or taking a business approach is absolutely inappropriate. And this is also why it's important that business, philanthropies, government and policymakers work together, because we have to think about how to parse out the different problems that we're trying to solve and what is the appropriate solution to those problems, but also what is the appropriate kind of capital to fund those problems. commercial capital is the most abundant. There is more commercial capital than there is philanthropic capital or there is government aid. So where commercial capital can play a role, that's why, that's where we think it's important to allow commercial capital to come in. But again, we can't solve everything with commercial capital or with the business solution. So you will need philanthropy and government intervention as well. But this is how I see our role in curating different issues and different problems and where capital should go.
Yeah, I love that explanation. And I'm going to ask you for another example, because I'm sure that our audience is really thirsty for understanding how within the Rise Fund of a company, how within the Rise Fund, you think about really innovating and driving impact to scale. So can you give us an example of what that might look like?
Yeah. So if you'll humor me, Melanie, maybe I'll try to give two quick examples that hopefully also will resonate with the audience. So one example, we have about 40 companies globally in the Rise Fund in the US, in Africa, India, China, Southeast Asia, Latin America, and in Europe across climate, agriculture, education, healthcare, financial inclusion. One of our companies is a company in India that's called Fourth Partner Energy. And Fourth Partner Energy today is one of the leading players in India in distributed solar. It was probably the number 5 company when we invested in it a few years ago. But today, with our capital that was really aimed at growth, it's become the dominant player in distributed solar. And what they do is they work with manufacturing companies, consumer packaged good companies to put up solar panels and power the energy needs of that plant or a set of banks through solar energy. This works in India because it is more costly to be getting your energy sources off the grid. So there's a business incentive to get solar because it is cheaper. So you generate higher profitability as an institution, but also India is one of the leading polluters in the world. There's a big set of programming around renewable energy and clean access to power, but you need folks to implement that. But it's what I'll call a collinear model where the profit and the sustainability of the model from a business perspective goes hand in hand with the impact. And today, Fourth Partner Energy, since we've invested, has effectively provided renewable energy that's avoided 2.7 million metric tons of carbon, which is the equivalent of taking 500,000 cars off the road. So that's one example. Second quick example is a company that we funded in the US in the education space. And this is a company called InStride. InStride is run by a very talented CEO, Vivek Sharma. And InStride was formed by the Rise Fund in partnership with Arizona State University to enable employers to give their employees the ability to get their college degrees, which is delivered as an employee benefit. So what happens is that there are about 35 million Americans who never were able to finish getting their college degree. If they get their degree, they can increase and improve their economic circumstances generally by getting better jobs. So again, this is a fantastic model where a firm like Starbucks, which was one of the first pioneer customers of this model, can enhance employee engagement, can provide an employee benefit that improves employee loyalty, while at the same time helping to upskill their employees to get better jobs in the future. So these are two great examples within the Rise Fund. One in India, run by Vivek Subramanian. Actually, it's two Viveks. One in the US, run by Vivek Sharma, that are incredible examples of impact companies.
I love the fact that your examples surround both the idea of empowering people to really affect change in their own lives, and the fact that education, we know, is one of those driving forces. Another area that affected education was certainly the pandemic. It's almost impossible for us to sit here in May and not realize the devastating effects that the COVID-19 has had on the world, and the gravity of the effects of the pandemic in India today and elsewhere impact or even influence the Rise Fund's portfolio companies. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, no, 2020 was a very, very difficult year. And, 2021 remains very difficult, especially in some countries now, like India, which is really affecting some extreme stress because of the COVID pandemic. But what we learned are, a few things. One is there's a tremendous amount of resilience in the portfolio companies that we invested in when you are leveraging technology. So most of our companies are well-footed in the world of technology when delivering energy or delivering healthcare services or education services. And technology can be a great boon and allow you to be a more resilient company and deliver your services more resiliently when the world shut down, when people had to stay home, when education had to be delivered online, when financial transactions had to be delivered online, when healthcare in some cases had to be delivered by telemedicine. Technology was of great benefit to many of our companies. So resilience and having resilient business models was one important lesson. A second important lesson for us was having mission and purpose-driven entrepreneurs who respond to crises as a call to action. So this was incredibly important. Our education companies sprung into action when schools shut down and kids had to go home to say, how can we deliver our services to continue educational learning, right, from the home setting and make things easier for parents and for school districts, and thinking also about equity issues and kids who couldn't get good connectivity at home. But there was a lot of action that we saw on that front. There was a tremendous amount of action even today thinking about the COVID crisis. We have a fairly sizable healthcare portfolio around the world, including in sub-Saharan Africa and India. And the extraordinary efforts being taken by our teams to respond to the COVID environment, everything from oxygen to medical care to vaccines and testing, all of those dimensions were really put into play by our entrepreneurs and our management team who really respond to a crisis, in great part because of their mission. So this is one of, I guess, the positives about the last 2 years is jumping to action, but also thinking about how to leverage your business model to be responsive, to be resilient, and to make it through the crisis.
Interesting. So interesting. I mean, the times that we're living in today, certainly the opportunity for us to invest within the areas that can help affect change now and in the future. One thing that I've been thinking about is the comparison now of how the world managed COVID-19 to how we're managing climate change. And for a short time, climate change, the conversation was almost put on hold because of COVID.
Right.
In both instances, we learned that everybody has to do their part because these are not local problems. COVID wasn't a local problem, and certainly climate change is not a local problem. We're all connected, Maya, and the pandemic has shown us that in full color. How is that influencing impact investors today?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it is true that responding to the COVID environment did teach us something about how to think about climate change. And again, I'll go back to something that I've realized is a recurring theme in our conversation, Melanie, which is that one of the things that is part and parcel of the impact world is collaboration. And it's interesting to see it sort of seep into what I'll call mainstream private equity. So when I came into TPG to work on the Rise Fund in 2017, it was the first time where alongside Bain Capital, a major private equity institution came into the impact space to really bring more capital to bear on some major problems. And in many respects, the big sort of private equity players of venture capital firms were all sort of quite competitive with each other. In the impact space, what you'll find is that there's actually a higher degree of collaboration. There's a higher degree of collaboration with other investors, but there's also a higher degree of collaboration with government, with foundations, and with other businesses, thinking about how we can corral all of our resources together to address an issue. So just as with the COVID pandemic, you saw a lot of collaboration, some competition maybe, but around how do you find a vaccine? How do you get health systems to get ready to sort of roll out services? How do you get government aid to come in and sort of support and provide an infrastructure for all of that? With climate, you find similar dynamics at play. So big businesses are committing to net zero or emissions reductions plans. We have regulators now starting to mandate or starting to require emissions reduction. And we have different governments putting in incentives, tax incentives and other incentives, investments in order to move economies into renewable energy and such. And so that kind of collaborative work, which you really see across different facets of government, philanthropy, and business, are very much what the impact world took to COVID, and the COVID environment has also been taking to the climate space. And I think in a good way, we will make more inroads because of this collaboration.
Look, one area that philanthropy has known forever is the fact that donors who come together can do better good. So I love that we're thinking similarly in the impact investing space. I know that we also share another similar point of view, which is our shared passion for improving the representation of women in the financial industry.
Yeah.
And I wonder why. We're both women. But we know how important that is, and we know that we had innovators from more diverse backgrounds. When they come together in positions of leadership, great things can happen. So tell us a little bit about your perspective on improving the possibility of having more women in leadership and just more diversity.
Well, I think, hopefully, Melanie, you and I can stand up as role models for others in the industry. But as you said, if I look at it for TPG, for the Rise Fund, for our portfolio companies, diverse boards, diverse management teams, when diversity is represented within a company, more diverse employee basis, generally tend to outperform peer groups that are less diverse. So there is academic research that validates that when you have diversity represented, you are more likely to outperform, because the way in which you approach your business, the way in which you approach the world, incorporates more facets of the world in it. So it's not just the right thing to do; it's also positive for business results. It is an area, though, where concerted effort is required. So within TPG and the Rise Fund, for example, we actually created goals for ourselves to look at the board of directors of companies we were invested in and to ensure that there was diversity reflected on those boards. We started with gender diversity. So we started by looking at the number of women. We're now increasingly looking at ethnic diversity, sexual identity diversity, and bringing other things to bear. Diversity, equity, and inclusion is another really, really important component of impact investing as well. So gender equity, inclusiveness, again, because it leads to better outcomes, but it also leads to the kind of society that hopefully we should all want to live in. It's the right thing. It also makes business sense. This is why there are important efforts, at least in our work, around promoting women and supporting women and understanding the specific challenges that women have in the workplace, but also supporting other diverse and underrepresented groups.
Excellent. I want to turn quickly to just one other perspective that I know we think similarly about. At Morgan Stanley, we advise our clients every day on how to align investments with their values throughout their philanthropic and investment capital strategies and portfolios. So how can we all here today at TiEcon use our capital to make an impact?
Yeah, so it's a great question. So what I will say is, especially today, 15 years after I first started in the industry, you can look across pretty much every single asset class that you might be invested in, whether it's mutual funds or private equity and capital, real estate, public equities, and you can find either what I'll call sustainable or ESG positive alternatives, or in an even more proactive way, you can find impact alternatives that perform at par with their appropriate market benchmark. So there is no excuse anymore for not aligning your money with your values. Philanthropy is still incredibly important, and that, Melanie, you're so much more expert on that. But if you think about even your pool of investment capital, increasingly you see individuals and institutions make choices that are aligned with values and that are also thoughtful about what is at least not harmful, if not of benefit to people and planet. And again, if you do the work, if you talk to Melanie's colleagues at Morgan Stanley, they will show you, debt, real estate, again, private equity, public equity. There are impact and ESG strategies that everyone can invest in. And there is track record and performance to make people comfortable about not sacrificing financial return, if that's your goal, but also don't forget the philanthropic side, because we have problems and issues that need to be addressed by philanthropic dollars. We can't just leave everything to investment dollars.
Yeah, certainly philanthropy gets started at the riskiest place of an issue.
Yeah.
One final question. And I promised our organizers that I'm going to keep us on time, but I have to ask you this question. When we're all rewatching this recording of this conference in 30 years, in 2050, Maya, 2050, what do you think we might look back on as the biggest new development in the impact investing space?
Well, I think for me, it's really that we moved the concept of capitalism into a place where it's not just about making money and generating profit at all cost, but thinking about how to run a business, thinking about how to invest your money in a way that is responsible to both people and planet. And as I've been living in the impact world now for the last 15 years, and obviously there were strategies that came before me, what I'm really, really happy to see today is how much the work we're doing is mainstreaming. So you have entrepreneurs, and I know there are many entrepreneurs in the audience today who are thinking about engaging in business where they want to run and they want to build a great business, but they also care about whether it's a customer problem or issue that they're trying to solve. They want to be good employers and have happy, satisfied, purpose-driven employees within them. They want to appeal to Gen Zers and millennials who are making consumer decisions that are aligned with their values. And they have shareholders who increasingly care about how they behave with respect to their employees, how they behave with respect to their customers, how they behave with respect to their planet. So I see impact investing in the world that I've lived in as the tip of the spear in this sort of new wave of companies and entrepreneurs and investors who really all are interested in building some very successful businesses, but that are positive contributors to society. And that 20 years ago, when I was 25 years ago, almost 30 years ago, when I was graduating from business school, the purpose of business was to make money. And then when you made all the money, you would go out and become a philanthropist and come to you, Melanie, and devote it all to the world. But we now live in this hybrid world where you can put the two together. So this is one of the things that I think is the legacy of this time, that we are going to mainstream sustainability, we are going to mainstream impact investing, and we are going to mainstream climate sort of consciousness, and we're going to reimagine capitalism in this way. And I'm very excited about that because when I first came into private equity and venture capital were very small, sort of niche industries 30 years ago. You know, they had existed for a little bit of time before that, but they were very niche industries. And today, very much mainstream. The amount of capital that we manage is much larger. So if the impact space and the sustainability space can grow to manage that much money, I think we will all be a job well done.
Well, Maya, I look forward to having a glass of wine with you 30 years from now and us reminding each other that we were in the industry before it was mainstreamed, and then we're living in it today over that glass of wine. So thank you so much, Maya. This has been an incredible conversation. You are one of my heroes. We really appreciate you joining us today at TiEcon.
No, I'm so happy to be here. I mean, TiEcon has been an important organization over time. I've been lucky to attend TiEcon conferences, you know, many years ago, and I think that there's so many interesting things that come out of this sort of collective of TiEcon. So thanks for having us, and importantly, thank you for supporting the work of impact investing and social entrepreneurs and social enterprises by having a day like today. Super, super important, and we're glad to see how much traction it's gained with your audience. So thank you for having us.
Thank you, Melanie and Maya, for a great conversation. You both are great models, role models for each one of us here. One of the biggest takeaways for everyone is when you are investing across different asset classes, make sure you look for both profit and purpose. Align your money with your values.